That's the only time I'm aware of that they did a full concert in the round.
And that's where I got this really wonderful picture of McCartney.
With greed, things got out of control and they became the #1 distributor of hydrocodone in the state of Maryland.
This bacteria is very clever in that it develops resistance to antibiotics you expose it to very quickly.
Women normally, as they walk through the door, are thinking that they're going to strip, that they're going to be strippers for the evening.
Meet Jenny Becker. She's a pole dancing instructor.
It's a microbiologist and a fan of sushi.
It's covered, completely covered. The fish is very nutrient rich, and then you're giving it a warm environment to grow in.
She knows all too well that
there's bacteria everywhere. If you are immunocompromised, if you're going through chemotherapy.
I didn't want to believe that I was being deceived. I didn't want to believe that she didn't love me.
Never in his short courtship with lifelong hopes.
I was almost ruined. And I did nothing wrong.
Horrific things done to that girl. You can never get those images out.
Were chock full of toddlers, infants and toddlers who were being brutally raped.
Maybe you've heard the infamous story that the Nazis made lampshades out of human skin. The lampshades were lost sometime after the war, so the tattooed skins are the only remaining evidence.
Because we thought we would hopefully honeymoon. June, we didn't get pregnant.
Then the overworked, stressed-out couple found a novel notion. Lucinda, who works as a travel writer.
The Real ID Act is a law that was passed in May of 2005. It's a surveillance infrastructure that's inappropriate to put on law-abiding, native-born American citizens.
In order for us to act and to properly sanction a driver who has engaged in bad behavior is that the public needs to follow up with it.
It can't just be me.
It's not just her. Meet Kathy.
And you just start thinking the worst possible thoughts.
Kathy's encounter with a DC cab driver spooked her so badly that she doesn't want to be identified.
Here's a question. How much is too much for a monthly car lease?
A reasonable amount is about $250.
Anywhere between $3 and $5.
What about $1,400 a month?
That's outrageous.
What if I tell you you're paying $1,400 a month for a car?
That would be a lot.
I'd be pretty upset.
You want to know for who?
Tell me.
You guys.
That's right, Congress.
The process for real cuts.
As they battle it out over budget cuts, Congress is rolling in high-end SUVs, some leased from luxury companies like Lexus and Cadillac, all paid for by you, the taxpayer. Fox 5 has found at least 90 members of Congress use federal money to pay for automobile leases.
Put this House on the right path.
As Majority Whip Kevin McCarthy spent the last week's debt ceiling debate calling news conferences to demand budget cuts.
We believe that we laid out a core position that we would not raise it more than we had cuts.
But what he never seems to mention is you're paying $773 a month for his 2011 Lincoln Hybrid MKZ.
We're more concerned about the policies and where this country is going.
Behind him, David Dreyer from California. You pay $598 a month for his lease.
The spending cuts.
California's Mary Bono Mack also likes to stand next to McCarthy at these things. You spend $749 a month for her lease.
Look, if we're serious about balancing the budget, we know that the car deal alone doesn't get us there, but to have the moral standing to make the tougher cuts, members of Congress need to give up some of their perks.
What are members being called upon to sacrifice?
Colorado Congressman Jared Polis says they're allowed to lease the cars, but in these tough times, should they?
If you do have a car, you generally have that instead of, for instance, another staff person to help your constituents with their Social Security or veterans benefits.
Both Republicans and Democrats take advantage of the perk, spending almost $500,000 on car leases in just the first 3 months of this year, including DC's Eleanor Holmes Norton. She did not want to talk on camera about the Toyota hybrid that costs you $552 a month. No one wanted to answer our questions as we went from one congressional office to another. Louisiana's Rodney Alexander is one of the biggest spenders. In just 3 months, he spent more than $26,000 on a Toyota Highlander hybrid. But the biggest monthly bill? Puerto Rico's Pedro Pierluisi. $1,400 a month for his 2008 GMC Yukon hybrid.
The way it works in Puerto Rico is that when you lease a car, they're giving you maintenance as well as insurance included in the payment. So that makes it more expensive.
Pierluisi is the only member of Congress willing to talk to us on camera because he says he needs his SUV for his job.
I use the car to travel throughout the island and visit my communities. I represent 3.7 million American citizens down there. So this is something is very valuable for my job.
Pierluisi says he will give up the SUV if leadership changes the rules. Speaking of leadership, neither Speaker of the House John Boehner nor Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi leases a vehicle. But buried on page 3008 in this massive expense report, Fox 5 found 12 miscellaneous automobile leases. A congressional source says they're SUVs used by Boehner, Pelosi, and other high-ranking leaders.
I think they should own their own vehicles.
It didn't matter if they're a Republican or a Democrat.
We shouldn't be paying for that, no.
All of these visitors at the Capitol say the same thing. If Congress doesn't give up the cars.
If they're making choices like that, then yeah, we need to take a good look at them.
These taxpayers say they'll make sure they lose them in the next election.
Okay, and how do you want your eggs?
They're working 24 hours a day at Bob and Edith's Diner in Arlington. The customers wish Congress would do the same.
I'm really upset with Congress right now. I mean, I just feel like it's a complete failure.
They watch the nation edge toward the fiscal cliff.
I've been in suspense the whole time. Like, I wonder what's going to happen.
What happened was a deal, sort of.
I mean, I know we got a deal, but in 2 months, we're going to have to go through the whole thing all over again.
Dice it up, and there's plenty of blame to go around.
Men with power and people who don't walk in the shoes of the everyday man and woman.
Well, you know what I'm sad about is like the great compromisers, you know, like Inouye and, you know, Kennedy and, you know, even like Senator Byrd, like they're gone. And like those are the people that were reaching across the aisle and really working together.
When the government's finished spending, there is simply not enough left on the table.
Bottom line is, if you got $100 coming in, $100 is your limit to spend.
We all are expecting, you know, everything. You know, but we need to like make a little bit of sacrifice to get there, I think.
The deal includes a 2% Social Security payroll tax increase. Does it upset you?
No more than a speeding ticket, so it's all money that I wish I could keep in my pocket.
I'd say that 2% probably won't kill me. I think that I'd rather do my part and contribute. I mean, we're in a world of hurt right now, I think, financially.
It's just a part of the thing that must happen in order to, quote unquote, make things better. Whatever that means.
Now, some of the people we approached wouldn't even talk to us. They said they are so angry at Congress that they were worried they might swear during the interview. A lot of the people here are getting back in the groove, heading back to work after a holiday break. Congress, on the other hand, is not in session next week. As one customer put it, wouldn't it be nice to have another vacation? In Arlington, Beth Parker, Fox 5 News.
In Maryland, every time you fill up your gas tank, rent a car, buy a house, or flush a toilet, special taxes are collected. Money that is supposed to go into state trust funds. But our Fox 5 investigation discovered that trust has been broken over and over again.
It's alarming, and people should be alarmed.
It's just become one big lie.
Last year, Maryland lawmakers raided more than 50 special funds, taking nearly $1 billion out of those banks and putting it in the general fund to close its budget gap, but leaving big holes in other programs.
It's a sin and a shame.
That's what it is.
AAA Mid-Atlantic's John Townsend is talking about the Transportation Trust Fund. Gas taxes, car title and registration fees, and rental car taxes help fill this fund. Cities and counties depend on their share to maintain roads and clear snow. Last year, lawmakers moved most of the local money, $372 million, to the state's purse, leaving barely enough to get through this winter.
We have a transportation infrastructure that is in serious need of repair. We have bridges and roads that are dangerous, and we have potholes everywhere, and our roads aren't being maintained.
One significant reason that we're not repairing the roads is that we're taking the money that was dedicated and that was solicited from the public on the pretext of repairing roads and using it for 100 other purposes.
The Bay Restoration Fund has also been hit. $195 million over 2 years transferred to the general fund, $90 million more planned for 2012.
Do these fund transfers hurt your mission?
Yes, absolutely they do.
Kim Komen is Maryland Executive Director of the Chesapeake Bay Foundation. It took some arm twisting in 2004 to create the special Bay Restoration Fund.
About a third of this bay has too little oxygen.
Each household in the state now pays an extra $2.50 a month. The flush tax, as it's known, is supposed to be dedicated to upgrading Maryland's wastewater treatment plants to protect the Chesapeake Bay.
There has to be more accountability for those dollars to be spent on what they've been dedicated for.
$32 million was moved from the Chesapeake and Atlantic Coastal Bays Trust Fund. That comes from part of your gas tax and car rental tax money, too.
There was supposed to be $50 million a year designated specifically for that fund, and we haven't ever gotten even half.
And that means some of the work needed to protect the bay doesn't get done, even though taxpayers have already paid for it.
And the list of rated funds goes on and on. The Used Tire Recycling Fund, which comes from a tire tax. The Waterway Improvement Fund, which comes from a boat tax. The Open Spaces Fund, which comes from a tax on property sales. The Volunteer Fire Company Assistance Fund, which comes from a tax on traffic tickets, and dozens more. Again, Maryland Delegate Louise Simmons.
The list is encyclopedic. When you actually look at all of the funds and the monies that are collected for one purpose and diverted for another purpose, it really is staggering.
Maryland's House Speaker Michael Bush defends the money moves.
And I don't think we're unlike other states that are sitting around trying to adjust their budgets to prioritize what their funding is. And so when we come here every year, our first priority is to fund our education system. And if we have to take some of the money out of the special funds to do that, then we do.
Some of the funds, like the Transportation Trust Fund and the Bay Restoration Fund, are replenished by borrowing money and paying it back with interest.
To me, it's really a trust issue.
Marta Mossberg is an analyst with the Maryland Public Policy Institute.
You know, you're really kind of disassociating what that money is paid for, what you paid for it, and where it's being used. And I think over time that builds a lot of distrust between the people and the people that they elect.
Take these to the voting unit.
And that could be a problem, especially at a time when Governor O'Malley is pushing to raise gas taxes, double or triple the flush tax, and maybe even add a statewide bag tax.
We advocate for these fees and feel a certain responsibility to the people that support them to make sure that the money's going there.
Delegate Simmons says these special fund transfers have been going on for a long time, and there is another way.
And saying, you know what, if we tax somebody and say the money is going for this purpose, we are going to honor our compact with the taxpayer. And if we need money for something else, we're going to have the guts and the conviction to say either raise taxes or cut back the program. And we have not shown the courage or conviction to do either, except to raise taxes in a crisis.
He and many others believe it's time to put the trust back in the trust funds.
This was the main convoy of truckers on the outer loop near Annandale just before 2 this afternoon. Perhaps a couple dozen big rigs, many with flags, more than a few blaring their horns, driving 3 abreast, and behind them, traffic slowing to about 30 miles an hour.
You know, I get a lot of
people flipping me off and stuff like that, but I get a lot more people waving to me and giving me a thumbs up, you know.
We rode with North Carolina truck driver John Johnson for part of the morning, asked what this is all about.
There ain't nobody wants anything, you know, violent to happen or any, you know, everybody's talking about, you know, oh, we need a civil war, we need a revolution and stuff like that. We need a peaceful revolution is what we need.
The issues fueling the truckers' anger all over the map.
Everybody knows about the Crosby, Stills, Nash song, you know, the 4 dead in Ohio. Well, how about the 4 dead in Benghazi?
Stay out of our health care. Let the doctors handle that. Don't get into things they don't understand.
Virginia and Maryland State Police tell us they're keeping a close eye on the rolling protest, warning truckers who purposely impede traffic. That's exactly what happened to Mr. Johnson.
There's a citation for the violation. Okay, it's a payable fine. You're going to have 3 options, okay?
He said he's writing me a ticket for impeding traffic and doing less than the posted, or doing less than the minimum speed limit.
All right, you're free to go, sir.
You have a good day.
Be safe.
Where the convoy is not, traffic moves fairly well. A driving rain, the biggest headache. Back behind the wheel and on the road again.
We're going to bump that speed up to 42 mile an hour.
Yeah, probably safer that way.
We asked Johnson whether this will have been worth the trouble.
It don't matter. It don't matter if we make a difference or not. You saw us. That police officer back there saw us. That woman right there seen us. You know, I mean, they knew we were out here, and I hope they listen.
They were as close as two sisters can be.
She was a beautiful young woman, dedicated to her family, her community, 2 young children.
Susan G. Komen, just 33 when she was diagnosed with breast cancer. That was in 1978, when a cancer diagnosis meant almost certain death.
In those days, Laura, there were no 1-800 numbers to call. There was no internet. You couldn't say the words breast cancer out loud, and you certainly couldn't read about them in the newspaper because most newspapers wouldn't print the word breast.
2.5 years later, Susan lost her battle, but right before she died, she asked her sister to make her a promise.
When I get better, I want you to promise me that you will work hard to cure this disease, because I don't want to see other people have happened what's happened to our family. And I remember I said to her, I will do this if it takes the rest of my life. I just didn't realize it really would take the rest of my life.
So, with a marketing background and no real plan, in 1982, Nancy Brinker founded the Susan G. Komen Foundation. And when she developed the race for the cure, almost everyone doomed it to failure. 26 years later, the foundation, known today as Susan G. Komen for the Cure, is in over 60 countries. And part of the reason the world knows about the foundation is Nancy Brinker's role on the world stage.
Because I need it to make a decision for tonight. I mean, I need it now.
After being named ambassador to Hungary in 2001, Brinker is now White House Chief of Protocol. Appointed by President Bush, she provides support in planning, hosting, and officiating ceremonial events for visiting heads of state.
It's been a real extension of a lot of the work I've done over my lifetime.
And in today's global climate, Ambassador Brinker faces some unique challenges.
When I came to be Chief of Protocol, I wanted to sit down with our staff and talk about our relevance and what we can do to enhance what we do, but also to engage the diplomats, the foreign diplomats, in a way that perhaps hadn't been done before.
On this day, John Kufuor, president of Ghana, is in Washington for an official visit. He, like many heads of state, requested to witness a wreath-laying ceremony at Arlington National Cemetery. He wanted to pay homage to American troops who fight for democracy overseas. From ceremonies like this to official visits at the White House, it's a different journey every day for Ambassador Brinker. She averages 1 formal visit per day. And this journey hasn't been particularly easy. Long hours, grueling travel. She's always got to be on her toes. As Chief of Protocol, she says she's learned how to be a better leader for Susan G. Komen for the Cure.
I hardly recommend it for everyone in the middle of their lives, because I now have issued a blanket apology to everyone who's ever worked with me, apologizing for what I might have done as leader.
What do you think your sister would say to you, given all of the successes you've had?
I think she would be very proud. I think she would be impatient still, because I think that what she went through in her disease. A lot of that still, unfortunately, is the same when people die of metastatic disease all too young.
From manufacturer to meltdown, every gun has a story, sometimes a very violent one. You are about to get a rare glimpse. We follow the timeline from the crime scene to a one-of-a-kind lab where guns are traced. ATF, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, is the lead federal agency in the fight against gun crime. Edgar Dominich is special agent in charge of the Washington Field Division.
Since 1969, every gun has a serial number and markings and manufacturing information.
Which is how ATF starts its trace when a law enforcement agency asks for help after recovering guns from a crime scene. In May, MPD and the Fed seized 23 firearms when they busted up the notorious 4th Street drug mob that operated in Southeast D.C. Where did those guns come from? It's not always easy to find out.
Well, some criminals, what they try to do is they try to deface the serial number.
But rubbing the number out or filing it down doesn't always destroy it. Sometimes the serial number can be raised. That's how police caught this guy, Garfield Headlam, and cracked an East Coast gun trafficking ring.
He was strictly doing this for the financial gain. He indicated that he was making $100 a firearm.
A sailor at the time based in Norfolk, selling guns to drug dealers along the East Coast.
We had one recovered in New York City, and we had one recovered as far away as Jamaica.
This is a 9mm semi-automatic handgun, basically the gun of choice on the street. Criminals like it because they can fire off more rounds than a revolver and get more bang for the buck. It's very similar to one purchased by Garfield Headlam, found several years ago in the back alley behind this house on Webster Street in Northeast D.C.
That may have been my husband because he's an ex-police officer, and I do recall that he did find a gun, but he did turn it in.
The serial number was obliterated, but technicians were able to raise it and track the gun to its original purchaser. Fox 5 was given a rare look inside the workings of the ATF's National Tracing Center division in Martinsburg, West Virginia.
We trace over 250,000 guns a year here for federal, state, and local law enforcement agencies.
In this high-tech day and age, you might be surprised to see how things work here. It's mostly done by hand. Hundreds of thousands of boxes of paper records are delivered and stored, shipped here from federally licensed gun dealers who have gone out of business. They are required to do so by law.
A third of the trace requests, somebody in the chain of distribution, either a manufacturer, a wholesaler, or a retailer, has gone out of business.
900 boxes arrive each month, acquisition and disposition books, paper records showing who actually bought guns from licensed sellers around the country. It's tedious work, but each document is separated. Scanners take digital images. 70,000 documents processed every 8 hours. And then, even after a case is closed, old microfilm copies are archived before the actual paper is destroyed.
I need some help with an urgent firearms trace regarding
The feds can even sometimes trace guns back to criminals who didn't buy them in the first place.
We traced the guns back to the straw purchaser.
Straw purchasers sometimes buy a gun for someone else for money. Investigators can then track the criminal through the buyer. That's what happened in the Headlam case.
It was the trace information that started to unravel his criminal activity.
After a 5-year investigation with help from the National Tracing Center, Garfield Headlam was finally brought to justice. He's now serving 10 years in prison, along with 9 of his co-conspirators.
And his firearms will continue to be recovered and used in crimes for years to come.
The ATF melted down and destroyed many of Headlam's guns, but more than 50 are still out there, possibly being used to commit other crimes. Karen Gray, Houston, Fox 5 News.
Ambulance, what is the address of the emergency?
A security camera captures this 911 emergency. A man suffering from sudden cardiac arrest is given CPR. 1, 2, 3. He's shocked with a defibrillator.
Deliver shock now.
He survives. In many ways, he's the exception, not the rule. Every year, 250,000 people across the country suffer sudden cardiac arrest. Yet the nation's EMS saves only about 5% of them. So what happens when you dial 911? Are your odds of making it better if you dial it here in Washington, D.C.? Or do your chances of survival actually improve if you punch those magic 3 numbers here in Washington State, as in Seattle, Washington? The answer is yes. 21-year-old Julia Rusinek collapsed there on Caroline Street. She was jogging on this D.C. sidewalk. She could have been saved if she'd gotten CPR and a quick shock from a defibrillator within 6 minutes. That shouldn't be a problem. The firehouse is less than a block away. They could have walked over here in less than 6 minutes, but that's not what happened. The ambulance crew was going off duty. They didn't want to make the run. The oncoming crew took their time. Julia would wait 12 minutes for a defibrillator. By then, it was too late.
I can't imagine how good an evening that person that refused to go because his shift was ending had to make up for our tragedy. I don't know how wonderful were the things that he was rushing to allow a young girl to die or any person to die.
If Julia had fallen on a Seattle sidewalk, her chances of survival would have improved dramatically. Seattle's system is one of the finest in the country. When it comes to sudden cardiac arrest, almost half of the people with the best shot at survival are revived. In Washington, D.C., only 4% make it. Attitude plays a huge role in survival rates. Seattle firefighters race to medical emergencies just like they do a fire. But that's not so in Washington, D.C.
You know, firefighters are trained to put fires out, and they are trained to respond to medical emergencies, but that's not their passion. Their passion is to go out and fight fire, not deliver medical care.
Changing the culture isn't easy, but D.C.'s medical director says it's being done.
If you look at where we're going to be a year from now, we're going to be right up there with the Seattles of the United States and the other folks.
But that's not the case today. In fact, the head of D.C.'s paramedics union tells loved ones, don't waste your time waiting on an ambulance. In an emergency, catch a cab to the hospital. Mike Walter, USA Today. When you punch 911, you expect the ambulance driver to punch it too.
Medic one, okay?
In some cities, even before the ambulance hits the road, there are problems that could spell the difference between life and death.
Okay, find out how many people are stabbed.
This is a call coming into a dispatcher in Washington, D.C.
Is the assailant still nearby?
A stabbing victim needs help.
Is there any serious bleeding?
But he'll wait. The dispatcher hits the wrong button on his computer, so the call is never routed to the person who actually dispatches ambulances.
Okay, we're going to send an ambulance as soon as possible.
Ambulances are sent.
Medical local engine 24 and ambulance 30 respond.
But none of the ambulances were coming here to 22nd and Savannah, where the stabbing victim waited for help. Luckily, he survived, but he'd have to wait quite a while. It took dispatchers 12 minutes to figure out that they hadn't even sent an ambulance. How did they realize their mistake? We told them about it. We showed this tape to D.C. Medical Director Fernando Daniels.
That should be happening now.
But it does. And here's another problem. This fire truck is responding because a man has collapsed on a D.C. street. But look, when they get off the fire truck, there's no sense of urgency. That's because they recognize the guy on the ground. This is the second time he's passed out and fallen off his bike.
He's back on the ground again, and here we are taking the piece out again to come down to see another guy who's, wasting our taxpayers' money.
Taxpayers take note. Now an ambulance has arrived. So this wasted call ties up one engine company and an ambulance.
This ambulance is being held up right now. Someone else may need it somewhere else in the city. You know what I'm saying? And there's nothing really we can do about it.
Medic one. Medic one, okay?
Actually, there is something that can be done. Washington could model their EMS system on that other Washington. Medic 1 is hitting the streets in Seattle. They bounce from call to call their entire shift. But in Seattle, there are no wasted calls. If medics determine there isn't a medical emergency, they're back in service.
We don't believe this to be a life-threatening problem, so we're going to call an ambulance and get him sent on up to Virginia Mason.
A private ambulance firm transports patients.
Recently developed a productive cough with yellow, thick sputum.
In Seattle, someone is watching over every aspect of the EMS system.
Easy does it. I'm just going to check your blood pressure.
Medics fill out detailed run sheets on every call. The stacks of reports are closely scrutinized.
And we do know that if we don't perform to that high standard, as a doctor would, we'll be called to task for it and have to answer for our treatment.
Bad response times and other mistakes simply are not tolerated.
It's not rocket science, but it's hard work. Every day, we ask ourselves the question, what can we do to improve?
The results in Seattle, every day they're improving. If you go down in this city with a life or death emergency, help's on the way. But if you need help in that other Washington, chances are a host of problems could prevent the ambulance from ever reaching you in time. Mike Walter, USA Today. Gary Terry's a corporate executive on the move. When he isn't on the highway, he's in the air. 2 years ago, he bolted through these doors hoping to catch a flight out of Austin. Gary Terry's highlighted here. He passes through the metal detector and drops.
My heart was actually stopped, so for all definable purposes, I was dead.
And Gary won't make it unless help arrives in a hurry.
Okay, I do have help on the way. Do you have your EMTs with him?
For every minute your heart stops pumping blood to your brain, your chances of survival drop by 10%. Toward the end of the 5th minute, survival becomes iffy. Within 10 minutes, you flatline.
They were doing CPR and shocked twice, and the second time it got into rhythm.
They did it within those first critical minutes.
They're calling for an AED, so it might be a heart attack.
A police officer provides the life-saving shock from a portable defibrillator.
I think about how lucky I was.
Gary's very lucky. In the top 50 cities, close to 9,000 people with a good shot at survival collapse each year with sudden cardiac arrest. About 525 make it. Why? Problems range from understaffed and overwhelmed dispatchers to infighting between firefighters and paramedics, which lead to deadly delays. And many cities use faulty methods to monitor their response time, so officials are unaware there's a problem. Remember, these aren't paramedics working on Gary. It's a security guard and police officer.
1, 2, 3.
Eventually, the EMS team arrived and got Gary to the hospital where he was confronted by his granddaughter.
She said, "Papa, please don't die. I need you here. I need you to be here and love me and teach me and be with me. And if you want to, that heart couldn't have hurt any more during a heart attack than it hurt right then."
A little girl got her wish. Gary Terry survived. But all across America, thousands are dying because of a broken EMS system in desperate need of repair. Mike Walter, USA Today.
Franklin, Tennessee looks like it was ripped right from the pages of a picture book, pristine and tranquil. It's easy to see why many escape the noise of Nashville to live here. Nearly 42,000 now call Franklin home.
When I moved here, I think it was about 3,500 people. The phone book was about 15 pages.
Bill Harlan has called Franklin home most of his life.
What?
The 77-year-old raises Tennessee walking horses on his 200-acre farm.
Come on.
A lifelong conservative, he cast his first presidential vote for Thomas Dewey.
I vote mostly for Republicans because most of them are for cutting taxes. And that, to me, is the big political thing, is who gets the money and who spends the money.
Harlan reflects how 1/2 of Americans voted in the 2000 election. He voted for George W. Bush. At a glance, Montclair, New Jersey could easily be mistaken for the serene setting of Franklin. Its quaint downtown looks like time has stood still and is nestled just 12 miles west of New York City. Like Franklin, people moved to Montclair to escape the city, but that's where the similarities end. Montclair is the liberals' nirvana. It's 1/3 black. Most people live in racially mixed neighborhoods, and interracial marriages are common. Jane Mandel and her husband, actor Frankie Faison, moved to Montclair 14 years ago.
Drove by the schools and we saw little black children, little white children, 50-50 split almost. I mean, I've never honestly seen anything like that in my life.
Their vote reflects how the other half of Americans voted in 2000 for Al Gore. The two cities are separated by some 700 miles, one time zone, and a number of political issues. But after September 11th, the two Americas started to look more like one. And those who were once quick to take a swing at New Yorkers suddenly had a change of heart.
If you can go through what happened September 11th and still have hatred in your heart, then it's hard to say that you're human.
All over Franklin, signs of support. At Eagle Rock, a site where many Montclair residents watched the World Trade Center towers crumble, a makeshift memorial was constructed. There's no doubt Americans came together after September 11th, but there are emerging signs that it's now getting back to politics as usual. Ginger Gadsden, USA Today.
Page 199.
Every president has a story.
If Washington had taken away one lesson from the French and Indian War,
and Steve Floyd,
Tyler had decided to dismiss his entire cabinet.
Knows them all.
Garfield, of course, had no such plans.
Or at least,
page 585.
He's getting there.
77 years ago, he began.
At one time, Floyd was an investment banker, bored stiff of long plane rides.
What better way to spend 10 or 11 hours on a flight than reading a great biography, and the president seemed like a place to start.
He's still an investment banker, but now he's on a mission to read and write reviews of every major biography of every president ever written.
My wife looks at this and sort of shakes her head.
He started with Washington 2 years ago.
I can tell you almost by month how long it's going to take me to get from there to there to there.
His spreadsheet shows that he's read 107 books and 49,000 pages. He's up to Teddy Roosevelt now and plans another 92 books to make it all the way to Barack Obama. Anyone can read a few on Lincoln, but how about 12?
Every author has his own style or her own style, and in fact, at times it's hard to sync them up because one doesn't really remind you of the other.
Even forgotten presidents like Benjamin Harrison, who served from 1889 to 1893, get equal treatment. Who knew there were 5 on our 23rd president? Floyd reviews them all on his website and ranks them between 1 and 5 stars.
I'm looking for the best biographies of every one of the presidents, and I don't care whether they were on the bestseller list or whether it's 90 years old or whether it's 15 years old and has never been read.
The only 5 stars so far? Ron Chernow's 2010 Life of Washington.
It's informative, but it's also entertaining. It's got to be something, it's got to be like a Harry Potter book.
Some of our 44 presidents have big reputations, but what happens when you get to know them as well as Steve Floyd does? He says some live up to their billing and others don't.
Went into Jefferson's biographies with a pretty high opinion of Jefferson, and I came away a little bit disappointed.
His opinion on our country has also changed. While many look at the way D.C. works or doesn't work, he says it's on par with the tales he's read.
It's never been worse except then and then and then and over here and over here. This is the history of the country. And whether you're talking about Andrew Jackson's day or George Washington's or frankly Garfield's, it's the same story all over again.
He's diving into Teddy Roosevelt and the turn of the century.
Page 160. The western sky was clear and lit by a rising full moon when Roosevelt emerged.
And has started reading at his kids' swim practices.
For me, reading is what I fit into those nooks and crannies of my life.
The hustle and bustle of the pool is white noise as he gives the occupants of the White House their once over in order.
I guess the key is really just slow and steady wins the race.
At a rate of 60 pages a day, from 1 to 44. In Fredericksburg, Virginia, Evan Axelbank, Fox 13 News.